The first compound was a standard marker. Every species in the compact gets it on intake, a low-dose chromatic metabolic tracer, inert in quantity, eliminated within 6 minutes by any functioning biology. We use it to calibrate the panel, set a baseline, give the instrument something familiar to read before we introduce the real compounds. The readout for human subject delegate Marin Solis showed elimination in 41 seconds. I looked at the screen. I looked at my junior technician S7. S7 looked at the screen. "Equipment check," I said. She ran it, everything nominal. Solis sat on the other side of the intake glass in assessment bay 14, hands folded in her lap, wearing the paper assessment gown we give to all delegates before their xenobiological intake clearance. She was looking at the wall panel to her left, which displayed a Thrivani abstract design series we use to keep subjects calm. She seemed genuinely interested in it. She had not reacted to the tracer injection at all, no pupil response, no skin conductance shift, no temperature elevation. She had turned her head slightly, and then returned to looking at the art. 6-minute elimination in 41 seconds. I logged it as an instrument anomaly, flagged for recheck, and moved to Compound 2. Compound 2 is an autonomic baseline probe. It traces the sympathetic nervous system, specifically the stress pathway cascade. In Thrivani physiology, it produces a mild warming sensation in the secondary nerve cluster and is fully metabolized in approximately 9 minutes. In Voraith physiology, the cascade runs longer, 11 to 14 minutes. In C-Thrani physiology, it is the slowest known metabolizer at 17 minutes. The compound is not pharmacologically aggressive. It simply follows pathways and shows us how they're built. I administered it at standard dose, 0.4 milliunits per body mass kilogram, as the protocol requires for a subject of Solis's recorded mass. Elimination, 2 minutes 4 seconds. S7 pulled up the stress pathway trace. There was nothing wrong with the trace. The pathway was there. The compound had found it without difficulty. It had run its course and been broken down, neutralized, and cleared at a rate for which we have no compact equivalent. Not slower than Thrivani, not slower than C-Thrani, faster than all of them by a factor that required me to run the math twice before I believed it. I called Senior Director Vel Oreth on the internal line. "Run it again," he said. I ran the equipment check. Everything is nominal. There was a pause. Is the subject distressed? I looked at Solis. She had tilted her head. She was now studying a different panel in the sequence. "No," I said. "She appears to be looking at the art." Another pause. "Run Compound 3, he said. "Standard dose. Call me when you have the readout." Compound 3 is not a tracer. Compound 3 is the first pharmacologically active compound in our panel, a mild metabolic suppressor. We use it to assess how a subject's body handles interference. In Thrivani physiology, it reduces metabolic rate by approximately 12% for a window of 22 minutes before the liver-equivalent organs clear it. In species with less robust metabolic architecture, Voraith, Dressen, Kelev, the suppression runs longer and deeper. In the 3 compact species with the most sensitive metabolic profiles, the compound requires half-dosing, or it produces a clinical suppression event requiring medical intervention. Standard dose for a subject of Solis's mass was 1.1 milliunits per kilogram. I administered it. She blinked once. Her head came slightly off the wall she had been using as a headrest. She sat up straighter, looked at the glass, not at me, just at the glass, the way subjects sometimes do when they feel the compound take hold. Then she settled back. The metabolic suppression trace showed an initial dip, 4.3%, well within the suppression band, and then a recovery curve. Not a slow, gradual recovery as the compound was metabolized. A deliberate one. The trace showed the suppression event, the body's recognition of it, and then a compensatory elevation, as though whatever metabolic architecture Solis carried had identified the suppressor and simply overrode it. Full clearance in 6 minutes, 20 seconds. The metabolic rate was, at that point, slightly above her baseline. I sat with that number for a moment. Then I called Oreth. She overrode it, I said. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Define overrode. The suppressor ran for approximately 40 seconds of effective action. Then her metabolic rate compensated and cleared the compound. She is currently running 0.3% above her pre-administration baseline. Another silence. What is she doing? She is looking at the art panel's director. I heard him breathe out through both his nasal slits. Run the full panel, he said. All compounds, standard doses. Call me when you reach compound 7. The full intake panel runs 12 compounds. The first 3 are, as I have described, relatively benign diagnostic tools, probes, mild interventions. Compounds 4 through 6 escalate. They are pharmacologically active in ways the first 3 are not. Compound 4 is a neural pathway marker that in sensitive species, and all known species are, to some degree, sensitive, produces temporary mild disorientation and an elevated heart rate analog. Compound 5 is a cellular stress compound that mimics, at very low intensity, the early stages of a toxicological exposure event. We use it to see how a body's repair architecture responds to the presence of cellular threat. Compound 6 is the panel's first genuine stressor, a compound that, at standard dose, has been known to produce a recovery window of up to 6 hours in the most robust compact species. I administered 4. Solly's blinked 3 times in rapid succession and touched her temple with one finger. Then she put her hand back in her lap. Elimination, 3 minutes 9 seconds. The neural pathway trace showed full coverage. The compound had reached every mapped pathway, and then systematic neutralization beginning at minute 1, completing at minute 3. Her heart rate analog did not change. Her pupil dilation showed a response that lasted 8 seconds. I logged it. I moved to 5. Compound 5 produced a cellular stress response that I watched on the secondary trace with the particular attention of someone who is beginning to understand, very slowly and against her professional instincts, that she is looking at something she does not have a framework for. The compound introduced cellular-level stress markers consistent with a low-grade exposure event. In standard Thrivani physiology, this would trigger a repair response of moderate speed and efficiency. In Solly's, the repair response was, I wrote in my preliminary log at the time, immediate and aggressive. Not aggressive in a pathological sense. Aggressive in the sense that the gap between the introduction of the cellular stress and the initiation of the repair cascade was shorter than the panel's minimum measurable interval. The instruments showed the stress introduced and the repair already underway, with no discernible lag. I noted this and moved to 6. Compound 6 did something I did not expect. Nothing. The compound was present in the bloodstream trace. It was detectable. I could see it on the panel. But its expected pharmacological action, the cellular suppression cascade that gives us a recovery window reading, did not initiate. The compound appeared to exist in Solly's system for 4 minutes and 30 seconds, producing no measurable action, and was then cleared. Not metabolized in the ordinary sense, not broken down into constituent parts and eliminated, cleared, as though whatever Solly's system classified it as, the system had simply decided the compound was not of interest and removed it. Solly's had by this point finished the art panel series. She turned her head, looked at the intake glass and said something. The audio pickup caught it. She said, "Is there a time estimate on the food tray?" Seva looked at me. I looked at the audio transcript on the log screen. I called Oreth. He arrived in the monitoring room 2 minutes later. He stood at my shoulder and looked at the compound action log without speaking for a long time. She asked about lunch, I said. I heard the recording. He scrolled up through the trace logs. He stopped at the compound 3 recovery curve. He scrolled down to the compound 6 clearance event. Run 7 through 12, he said, full standard dose. 7 through 12 represent the panel's upper register. They are not diagnostic tools. They are stress response benchmarks, compounds chosen specifically because they produce robust, measurable reactions in all known compact species at the doses we use. Compound 8 is the panel's most aggressive neural stressor. At standard dose, it produces a recovery window of 4 to 18 hours depending on species. Compound 11 is the only compound in the panel with a species-specific contraindication note. In Dressen subjects, it requires a 20% dose reduction. At full dose, it can be clinically significant. I administered 7. Recovery, 11 minutes. 8. Recovery, 22 minutes. The neural stress trace showed a response. I want to be accurate here, it showed a response. Solis had pressed her back against the chair and her eyes had closed for approximately 90 seconds. Her heart rate analog elevated to 112% of baseline. Then it began to drop. By minute 8, it was at 104%. By minute 22, it was back to baseline. She opened her eyes. She looked at the glass. She said, still nothing on the food tray. 9, 10, 11 full dose. Seva made a small sound when the trace came in. Not a word, just a sound. Oreth put his hand on the back of my chair without gripping it, just rested it there. The compound 11 trace showed initial uptake, a stress response that reached 119% of baseline heart rate analog, a cellular suppression marker that was elevated for, I am reading directly from the log as I write this report, 4 minutes and 8 seconds. Then the suppression marker began to fall. By minute 9, it was below the clinical threshold. By minute 14, it was undetectable. By minute 19, Solis's metabolic rate was running at 101% of her pre-panel baseline. At minute 21, she asked, for the third time, about the food tray. I told Seva to go get it. Then I administered 12. Compound 12 is the panel's ceiling. It is not, to be precise about this, intended as a treatment or a weapon. It is a research compound, a xenobiological stress response ceiling finder. We use it to locate in any species the upper limit of metabolic adaptation. The theory is that every biology has one. You introduce enough challenge and at some point the adaptation response begins to lag, the recovery window lengthens, and you find the ceiling. We use it at the end of every intake panel. We always find the ceiling. I administered it at standard dose, 2.7 milliunits per kilogram of body mass. Solis's eyes closed. Her head went back against the headrest. Her heart rate analog climbed to 127%. Her cellular stress markers elevated. Her neural pathway trace showed simultaneous activity across 17 mapped pathways. I have administered this compound to 17 species in my career. In 15 of them, this is the point at which the recovery window begins, a measurable lag in the compensation curve, the body's systems overextended and working to catch up. In Solis at minute 8, the compensation curve did not show a lag. It showed an acceleration. I looked at the trace. I looked at it again. I pulled up the calibration log. I called up the instrument check record from the beginning of the session. Everything was nominal. The trace showed what it showed, a compensation response that was not slowing as the compound's challenge mounted, but speeding up, as though the compound's aggression was being met not with diminishing returns, but with escalation, the body committing more resources the harder it was pressed. By minute 18, the compound 12 trace showed full clearance. Solis's metabolic rate, 102% of pre-panel baseline. Seva came back with the food tray. She set it in the pass-through. I watched Solis get up, collect it, sit back down, and begin to eat. I have been a xenopharmacological compliance officer for 11 years. I have run the intake panel on 46 species. I have found the ceiling on every one of them. I have a form in the assessment system with a field labeled metabolic tolerance ceiling. and a drop-down for expected response category at ceiling compound, with 23 options covering everything from mild suppression to clinical intervention required. I opened the assessment form for Solis' intake panel. I looked at the metabolic tolerance ceiling field. I looked at the 12 compound traces laid out across the panel log. I left the ceiling field blank. In the notes field, which accepts free text, I typed, "No ceiling located at standard panel dosing. Compensation response showed acceleration at upper register challenge, not deceleration. Recommend expanded compound protocol. Exercise caution." Then, because the form requires an expected response category, I selected the closest available option. It was not close. I filed the report. I flagged it for Director Orath's review. I saved all instrument logs. Through the assessment glass, Solis had finished about half the food tray. She looked up at the observation window. I don't think she could see me. The glass is one way, and gave a small nod in the general direction of where she must have assumed we were standing, as though she were acknowledging a courtesy. I have thought about that nod a great deal since. It was not the nod of a subject who had just been administered 12 pharmacological compounds in sequence, including the panel's ceiling compound at full standard dose. It was the nod of someone who had been mildly inconvenienced by a long wait and was expressing mild gratitude that the wait appeared to be ending. Compound 12 clears in 18 minutes in a human subject. I have that data now. What I do not have is the number it should not have cleared in. That number, if it exists, is not in our panel. Whether it is in our next one remains, at present, an open question.